specialist, professor, and consultant. And we're here tonight to answer any of your questions about personal branding, LinkedIn, managing your social media and social media presence. So if you have questions, please feel free to join. If you're watching a recording, please feel free to hit us up in the comments and we'll try and address as many of them as we can. If you really enjoy the show, let us know and we'll make sure and have Leslie back on in the future. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Leslie.
I'm so happy to be here.
Well, kicking things off, while we're waiting on people to join, what are some of the, basics? Because almost everyone, or at least everyone, should have a basic LinkedIn page. And a lot of people, I think, don't really put thought into the image they're putting out. They just look at LinkedIn as a online resume. Where does someone get started? What should they start thinking about when they're trying to begin managing their brand and how the world sees them?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably one of the most underutilized tools when it comes to social media because people are really afraid of using it. So basically, I like to think of LinkedIn as your resume with personality. There's a lot more to it than that, but it is that first brand impression. And so one of the things I have some of my clients and my students do is to Google themselves, like Google their name. And typically you'll find that LinkedIn is one of the highest ranked sites when someone Googles your name. So what is that first impression? And it's really important to sort of get on the same side of the table as the people that you're trying to impress, just to really help frame up the story of who you are, what you do, and how you help. So I can go further. I can talk for a good 3 hours on this and not take a breath, but I'll let you ask the questions.
Absolutely. No, that's exactly what we're here for. So I think one of the things that people forget is it's not just when you're talking to people. It's not just when you're working or maybe in an interview, whether it's internal or external, but LinkedIn, your brand, your media is out there representing you all the time. And, we can let it be uncontrolled, kind of like having a yard where we're never using weed and seed, we're not pruning, we're not doing anything, and it's going to get wild and crazy. What are some of the things that can happen if you aren't careful with your brand, with your posts? Let's look at some of the horror stories and go the opposite direction.
Okay, the horror story. So where do we even start with that? So part of, as I said, like if people are Googling your name, and like, as I said before, like we talked, it is more than just a resume site. That even if someone is referring business to you and they say, listen, I've got this great guy, Hans Ekman, that you need to speak with, more often than not, we're going to Google that person's name. So if there's no photo, if there's no good story, if there, or if it's, the story is incorrect or whatever, and there's some really, really bad pictures out there too, Hans, like that first impression of that photo is everything. What kind of first impression are you putting out there to the universe and to those potential clients and those potential opportunities? So, I've seen so many bad pictures, including people who will pretend that they're George Clooney and put pictures up of that, or people smoking or drinking. And the worst one, I think I've shared it with you, is like people with no shirt on. Men, women in bikinis, there's a whole lot of people out there with inappropriate photos. And that is a huge first impression. Like that's one of the most important first impressions. So at the very least, have a good professional headshot of yourself.
Yeah, I think, in Facebook, you can, maybe on a dating site, you can get away with the cropped photo from whatever party you were at, but LinkedIn is designed exclusively to be the professional. So unless that is your brand, like if I'm a bikini model, sure, that would sell a story.
Let me challenge you on that, though. Would you show up to a business meeting in your bikini and all lubed up with your Speedo on?
If I had the body and it was for a modeling job, I think I would. Not having either, it's probably safer because I think people want to deal with someone who's professional and has integrity. So why not err on the side of caution?
Yeah. I think it's like show up in your bikini if you're going to go on the Insta or those kinds of things. I think this is really, the psychology of LinkedIn is far more the professional brand. So even if your brand is that you're a bikini model, save that. Not don't save that. Don't put that as your first impression. Just have a nice headshot. I think it's not difficult to do.
Right. Well, and I can't think of any HR departments or hiring managers or even teams who aren't at least looking at LinkedIn as a validation. When I was hiring
Yep.
someone a while back, the interview, I think they thought it was going pretty well. We finished through the routine questions pretty early. And then I asked, so tell me about your business as a professional coach and as a writer. And they were floored and shocked that how could you figure this out? And I was like, well, I looked at LinkedIn. You mentioned you had written a book. I searched for the book. I found it. That led me to a consulting site which says you're charging $400 an hour for consulting. So why do you need this job paying $80,000 as a BA? And they didn't have an answer. They were like, well, basically I'm looking for a job until my consulting and coaching takes off. So this is only going to be temporary. I'm like, well, you should have led with that. I would have brought you on temporarily, but when you're hiding it, now I can't.
Yeah. And some people like you, I know you, that you go through your due diligence, you're thorough, you're maybe more thorough than most people out there. But regardless, right, from that first impression it is so very important. And you want to be, you want to be authentic, right? You definitely want to be authentic and so forth. So I think that that's crucial.
Okay. Well, and for everyone who's joining us, great for you to join. And as you have questions, thoughts, comments, please shoot them over in the comments. We'd be more than happy to hit as many of them as we can. So one of the things is, okay, it's not just a pretty resume, but part of it is I need to figure out who I should be. Who am I portraying? Because, we hear advice that my cover letter, my overview, my resume should be tuned to the job you're applying for. Well, LinkedIn is kind of a catch-all for anyone who might see you. How do I start figuring out what my personal brand is? What is it that I'm uncommonly good at that I might want to represent or feature in LinkedIn, just at that starting level. And then we'll talk about a little more about, going above and beyond and really standing out in a crowd.
Yeah, so that's multifaceted. So in one way, what I say is like, well, I don't say this, Jeff Bezos says this, is like your personal brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. So in one way, what you want to do is you want to craft a story for the reader, right? And to your point of, if you have a resume, you're going to tailor it to each specific job. And so what you have to think about LinkedIn is sort of like a master resume, or basically just like the structure of like the house. Like if you're going to have a strong foundation of a house, it's going to basically be kind of a catch-all. So you kind of want to have it mirror to a certain extent the resumes that you're sending out, and it can be very closely aligned with it, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. And so to the comment about like, how do you start telling that personal brand story? That's an interesting place to start. So I think one of the things you have to be thinking about is, again, who are you trying to impress? What are the important things that you have done? Because nobody knows what you know from your perspective. How can you impress upon them the value that you bring? And that is sort of, there's like a whole, we can go down that rabbit hole of telling, like standing in your value and telling your story, because there's a lot of people out there, probably 95 to 98% of my clients they have a hard time talking about their accomplishments. I'm talking like the most senior executive level people, Canada, the US, all around the world. We almost all universally have this fear, universally are fearful of sort of standing in our value and telling people how great we are at what we do. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Well, AJ asks, right up your alley. What about making political commentary on LinkedIn? And I think we could even extend that to more of the social posts. So what about getting political? When is it potentially appropriate or okay? And when do we start to get close to that gray line or the edge of the cliff?
Well, that's a whole rabbit hole to go down to. What's that the common phrase, saying is something about like never talk about politics, religion, and what's the other one? I don't know, money or something like that. I can't remember what it is.
We can't say it because we don't mention it.
I would have to sort of think that I would refrain, especially in this political climate right now, to refrain from talking about politics if you want to get a job, unless that is your brand. So I do, I have worked with some, like one, I'm not going to name his name, but a politician. I have worked, but I'm a little nervous about sort of aligning myself with that politician because I don't want to, that to affect my overarching business brand. If there's like people that are really left wing or people that are really right wing and they go, oh, I can't, if she's worked with that particular person, then obviously she believes in that political ideology or whatever, I'm just going to stay out of it and just steer clear unless you are a politician, and then you use a channel in order to propel yourself using your platform.
Okay. What if it's a political topic that is directly related to your brand or your experience? So, for example, I take an IT background, so net neutrality is a hot issue. Freedom of information, security or liability like GDPR, where companies are spending inordinate amount of money to protect their data. So is it, if I'm sharing information, maybe sharing articles about how politics or regulations or government are influencing the industry, but not making it about a political party or a political statement? How close to the gray area are we coming here? Or is that kind of watch where you step still?
I really don't have an answer for you. You probably can answer your own question because you can somehow take my nonsense and turn it into like a clarity within a sentence. What I typically will say to my clients is never publish anything online that you wouldn't want seen on a billboard. So unless you are perfectly comfortable with seeing that information, blast it out anywhere. And that includes anything that you're posting on your personal sites as well. Yep. Unless you're comfortable seeing that on a billboard, don't publish it.
Yeah. Well, and a while back, I was reading a book on interview skills. I went through several, and one of the things they said is never wear too much perfume or cologne. And if you smoke, never smoke before you go into the interview for two reasons. You don't know how people are going to react, and that might turn them off. The second is what happens if that scent gets picked up on them, and then someone in the office, maybe someone at home, comments on it. That could portray negatively. And I've always remembered that because we don't often think about that trail or residue we're leaving behind. And I think that really fits into the political comment. It may resonate, but is that leading a trail that some time later could get us canceled or put us in trouble?
Yeah, and sometimes what our intentions are when we put things out there aren't perceived by your target audience in the same way as well. So one of the exercises that I have my students, they're working on this right now, is doing an audit of their digital footprint. And so the question I am asking them for their first assignment is, would you hire you? Get on the same side of the table as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, as your next opportunity, and do your due diligence insofar as not just your LinkedIn presence, your Facebook, your Insta, your Snapchat, your TikTok, and look at it through the lens of somebody who could be hiring you or could be working with you. And would they hire you based on that digital footprint? And sometimes, my students have come back and say, I didn't even realize that my, MySpace account was still up, or, these things that they think they're being cute or they're being funny. And they're like, there have been more than one time that I've talked to a hiring manager who has said, I had the perfect person on paper and I Googled their name and they came up and they were feral. And so they were like, we don't want that crazy person working in our organization. And so they were disqualified. And here's another example, and this goes to sort of Twitter. There was one example of a young potential intern for NASA. Did you see this? It was a couple of years ago. And so this young, do you know the story?
No, please share.
Okay, so this young person went onto Twitter and was like cursing and saying like, I'm going to be interning at NASA. And then somebody wrote, not an anonymous person, but another person on Twitter wrote language. And then the person said, S my D, I'm working at NASA. The person who said language was actually somebody that was on the board of directors or somebody that was really high up in NASA that was basically saying, you are now associated with the NASA brand. he wasn't like saying you're not going to get hired or whatever, but the person just, and then it just snowballed from there. The person was disqualified then from being an intern
Yeah.
in NASA. So, you think you're being funny, you think you're being playful, not always. You're aligning yourself with that professional brand. So don't do that.
One of the presentations I do is how to market yourself either for a better career or better annual reviews. And one of the things I love to do was actually to Google some of the people that were on the board or maybe affiliated with whoever I was presenting to and share snippets from their professional relationship, for their social or professional, and say, how would you rate it? And
Yeah.
the number of times people went home that night and started turning on their private filters on Facebook or looking through and deleting old things. So let's talk about that a little bit, because it would be easy to say LinkedIn is my profession, only look there. But Instagram, Facebook, everything else we're putting out public is leaving these scent trails, is leaving potentially either helpful or damaging. How do we separate our personal interests and personal brand from our professional brand? And what are some things people should start at least considering as they're taking more control over their branding?
We'll definitely realize that the psychology of each channel is different for sure. Realize that LinkedIn is the professional channel. I'm seeing that there's a lot more Facebook like posts on LinkedIn, which drives me insane. But also, to your point, is locked down. Like realize that all of these channels, Facebook, Instagram, they're all set to public. And so people don't necessarily realize that by default, every single channel out there they want you to share your information with the world. So at the very least, go through and lock down your settings on the social channels. But again, it is important. Just don't publish anything. I mean, there's been stuff that people have posted. There was one person who I believe was one of the senior legal people senior lawyers at CBS TV, who at one point had posted I think on her Facebook account, and I'm not sure if it was private or public, but someone took a screen grab of it to say that the shooting that had happened in Las Vegas, that because the country music, I'm going to get this wrong, but the audience was full of country music people who have been traditionally, are you still with me? Because I went out here.
It's rejoining, so we'll hold a second and then.
Okay.
All right. And we're back. This
Yeah.
is why we're on a beta platform, but the team is doing a great job getting everything running and up to speed. So occasionally there's blips and we roll with it. So you were saying about making comments, that there were comments about the Las Vegas concert shooting.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, this person said, well, because country music fans are typically Republicans and, and all of the right to bear arms and so forth. And so they got what they deserved, basically, is what this senior lawyer at CBS said. Well, you can't publish those kinds of things on your social media channels. You just can't publish that, even if you think it's private, because somebody could potentially screen grab it and share it and so forth. So things that we think are just in our personal lives are affecting our professional lives. Look at all those people that stormed the Capitol, and people were taking, all the pictures of those people. Like every single person that I've ever seen, they've all lost their jobs as a result. They're on a no-fly list. They're like all these different things. So what you do in your non-working hours affects your professional presence 100%.
Yeah. And that's tough. One of the things I realized over the last year or even two, when we looked at really what's dubbed the cancel culture, unfortunately, is we never know what's going to change and what attitudes are going to change. So even if we think we're doing well, for example, I could say, hey, I had a wonderful day with my family at the zoo, and 10 years from now, zoos might be the most horrible things ever. So since nobody really looks back through my Twitter history or Facebook or anything like that, I just decided that I'm going to keep at most 1 to 4 weeks of history and then auto delete everything. Whereas with LinkedIn, because I'm building a professional trail, I'm going to keep that up and make sure if I post it on LinkedIn or on my Ekman guides, anything related to it, it has to be something that's worth keeping up permanently.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of subjective, right? I mean, I have gone through and have deleted stuff on my Facebook. When they went to that longer format of the wall, I went back and deleted some stuff in the past. I'm just mindful moving forward to think about, what are the consequences of these things. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and the other thing is that people forget that this legacy that we're leaving is there in perpetuity, so that our
Right.
great grandchildren are at one point could potentially go back and say, like, on this, on this screencast or whatever, they'll be like, oh, by the way, like, that was my great grandmother or whatever it is. So we have to behave ourselves for, future generations.
Yep. Well, AJ brings up that my LinkedIn profile is set up so that people can only add me if they know my email. Is this best practice, or is it significantly limiting my professional reach? And I know from the workshops and presentations, this is where you and I differ.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more likely to link with anyone who is real and professional, so not fake and not trolling or just doing sales. What's your approach to allowing people to link, being accessible, and controlling your professional network?
Yeah, I'm not as hardcore as AJ. So I at least allow people to try and connect with me. So you don't need your email address in order to connect with me. I mean, I think if you're it's all subjective. It's all how you want to roll. And to your point, AJ, or to Hans, is like, you accept connection requests from people because you're interested in getting to know them. My rule of thumb is I want to start a dialogue before we connect. So there's a couple of different ways that I do this. Number one, every time I send a new connection request to someone, I always qualify, how did we meet, or why do I want to get to know them? So it's always a personalized connection request with either, hey, we met at, Project World or whatever kind of conference that we've been at, and I'd love to stay connected with you here on LinkedIn. Or if someone sends me a connection request and I don't know who they are and I want to qualify them, I might, depending on who they are, respond to say, thank you so much for the invitation to connect. Can you refresh my memory as to how we know each other? And that then puts the onus back on the person who's sending me just a blanket connection request. Because I think about, oftentimes, the people that are looking to connect with me could just be going through and hitting connect because they think
Right.
that the best key performance indicator, the best way to measure success is to have 10,000 people that they're connected with. I'm much more selective with my connections, because I want to connect with people either I do know already or the people that I want to get to know. And that includes doing public speaking. So maybe we didn't get a chance to interact face to face, but anybody that's on this chat tonight, reach out and connect and say that, you saw us here. Because I think what is important and people don't necessarily take into consideration is there's a human being at the other end of the device. And so we want to build and nurture those connections through micro moments, through every single time we connect with them, we're actually trying to enhance our relationship with them. And I think I have about 3,000 connections, which, big to do. But I've also, and here's another thing, is I changed my connect button to a follow button. So
Nice.
I have over 3,000 followers. And that's not just to be like, oh, the gates are closed. No, it's like people can still follow the content that I have, but I'm very selective about who I keep in my network, because really it's important to me that the posts that are being shared by people that I want to get to know as well. So I don't want someone who, say, is a florist from Ireland, if they're going to be posting random things and they're never going to be my target audience and I don't care, then I'm not going to connect with them, if that makes sense. But it's all whatever works for you.
Excellent. Well, Amy brings up something on topic, and then I'm going to jump up to Fat Guy Out West, who also had a question. So Amy was asking, let's say we connected with someone and then found out they're immediately blasting us with sales attempts. Maybe they're not real. Maybe they've got a profile that we don't want associated with ours. So can you delete a LinkedIn contact, and do they know when they're deleted?
That is the biggest fear most of us have. So to basically unfriend or unsubscribe is one of the biggest things that people are sort of nervous about. Like, what if I click ignore? What if I what if I unfriend them or disconnect from them? They won't get a notification. You might appear back again in the algorithm as someone that they haven't connect with, and they might be like,
Right.
oh, what happened there? And that's when I do the, oh, technology is so weird. But if they're, if they're jerks and they're spamming you from the get-go, then they don't deserve to be in your network in the first place. And if someone is really bad, then you can block them. You can hit the block button. I think it's like where there's like 3 ellipses, and you can click on that
Yeah.
or more or something like that. And if someone's being, really is troublesome, you can block them as well.
Yeah. And I would add, be careful about blocking everybody that you just don't want to connect with. Like that
Yeah.
is reserved for people who are really out trolling or phishing, because when you get 3 blocks, LinkedIn can lock your account or kick you off the platform. So, if I reached out to Leslie and she's like, I just don't want to connect with you, by blocking me, reserve that for the real jerks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what
So
is,
you can
yep,
disconnect. Yeah, they're never going to get a notification. We're also worried about the political correctness of, unconnecting from people. And really, I give people a lot of leeway because I'm so selective with that initial connection that I accept or whatever from the beginning, that there's been times when people will start to spam me right away, and I'll say, please don't
yeah,
do that. Like, I'll be gentle and say, in my Canadian way, right? Like, oh, passive aggressive, please don't, do this. This isn't the platform for it. And if they still keep hammering it at me, then
yeah.
out you go into the bin.
Yeah, I've had to, and there seems to be a lot more people that are trying to use LinkedIn for sales, and I can understand it. I don't hate it. So with the ones that are close enough to my domain or industry, I've been saying, hey, thanks for connecting. I'd
Yeah.
love to follow you here, but I'm not interested in your services at this time.
Mhm, mhm.
And if they continue to troll or continue to hit me up for sales opportunities, or I'm getting the blanket bulk messages, I can them. I've only, in the history of doing that, and I've done that a couple hundred times now, unfortunately, I've
Oh,
only had,
times.
I'm
Oh,
getting at
Lord.
least one, I'm getting at least one a day with someone who is trying to sell me a book offer, booking for conference speakings, consulting, coaching, all this stuff. And I've only had one person who got offended and said, why did you think I was trying to sell something? I said, well, look at your message. This looks a lot like the people who are trying to sell and connect to sell. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm happy to talk and have a dialogue, but I'm just not into your services at this point. And it was fine. And then
Yeah.
actually, even this morning, I had another one who I said the same thing. And they said, well, we still encourage you to check out our free coaching and classes and offerings. And I let that sit. We'll see if it goes anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, it's like
yep,
any kind of relationship. This is what frustrates me so much. And I do teach courses on social selling and that kind of stuff as well, because and like you and I both know, like the American way of selling is a little bit different than the Canadian way. We're a lot more passive and all that other stuff. But how would we interact if we were to go to a networking meeting? Would I just walk up to you, Hans, and be like, buy my stuff? Like, you really need to buy my stuff. I'm amazing at it. You would love me if you worked with me. No, I would say, nice to meet. Tell me a little bit more about what you do. Let's just see if there's any synergies here. And I think that there's like this disconnect, and frustrates the heck out of me that people just are like, what I've heard is called pitch slapping, right? Like selling you right off the hop, like, buy my stuff. It's like, you want to grab a drink before you try to get me into the next step, like, come on, like, it's
right.
it's it's frustrating to me. And I think that people just think, well, if I just blasted enough people, someone's going to pick up, someone's going to say, yeah, this works for me. It doesn't, though. Ask questions, like, try
Yeah.
to encourage, like, learn from each other, as opposed to, anyway, you know me about this. I could go down that whole rabbit hole, like, oh,
Well,
frustrating.
Fat Guy Out West, so great to see you again. Glad you could join us today. Had a comment, and I think this goes back to my new policy of delete everything in the past, because I don't want to be in trouble because zoos become unpopular in the future,
Yeah.
and said that was the hardest part to disseminate. How far back do you save before people thinking you're hiding something? So that's something I hadn't really considered or thought about, that in Facebook, Twitter, everything I've got set to auto delete. Is that looking like I'm hiding things? Are people going to notice? What's your thought on that? Or is there a equivalent carryover to LinkedIn?
I mean, you know, listen, some people don't have any digital footprint at all. I mean, you get your certain age, some people aren't on like hardly any of these social channels. Does that mean that they're, a terrible human being? No, it just means that they're not comfortable with the channel. But um, that's really a question for you, Hans, because you're the one who's like been far more strategic about deleting your past. I haven't really deleted my past history of things. I let things lie because I don't think there's anything in there that's going to disqualify me from getting opportunities. But this is where your mind and like you're more strategic about future pacing and so forth.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well,
that's a good question.
If it turns out to be something that burns me, it's too late. I hadn't really thought about that. I'll probably give it some more thought, but what I ended up deciding was for anything that's in the moment, like Twitter's very much in the moment, Facebook seems to be in the moment. All of those, I'll leave certain posts up. Like for Facebook, I read a lot of articles about COVID and other health issues. So those I've left up in my profile because they're still relevant, and eventually I want to go back and get those links and put them into an article. Then I'll probably delete them from Facebook. But Twitter, like, I don't think, other than maybe some pictures occasionally, there's really nothing that anyone cares about that I'm worried about. So for me, deleting my likes, I pared down Facebook because I'm really not happy with how Facebook has been handling data and privacy policies and not really showing much respect to their user base. We get what we pay for. I understand that. And so I've pared my Facebook connections down to the absolute minimum. But on the same vein, I recently set up an Ekman Guides business page that people can follow because that's where the audience is. That's where people want to see or watch or share. So from that standpoint, I'm just being careful that everything I can now direct to the professional channel, if that's going to stay there for a while.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And kind of even going back to AJ's comment about politics too. So you triggered me. Like I was thinking about it from a LinkedIn standpoint, from a Facebook standpoint, and all of like the like sort of those diverse opinions that are going on from the political, like what's going on politically. And we Canadians, we follow you guys pretty religiously about what's going on. And so even though we don't have a say in the matter, there's a lot of people that have got a lot of very strong opinions up here. And I have, because of certain people in my feed, in my Facebook feed, that have posted things about conspiracy theories and things that I have changed vendors as a result of things that people are posting. So if you're posting things, and I have been very, very open to people with, and I mean, Hans, you and I talked about this, is if you've got a different political, view, if you've got a different religious view, I love learning about that kind of stuff. I'm eager to learn about it. If you're posting misinformation or fake news or, that kind of thing,
right,
and you're going off the dial and posting things that I cannot, in good conscience, support in any way, shape, or form, then I am definitely, I live literally changed vendors. Even though I need need my hair done again, my hairdresser is no longer my hairdresser anymore, because he was posting things about getting microchipped and stuff, and I was like, okay, well, you had me, then you lost me. You can support anybody that you want politically, but when you start posting some pretty crazy things, then I'm afraid you're out on my part. And that's a personal preference. And I don't think I'm alone. I think other people would agree that they've changed vendors, they've unfriended family members and that kind of stuff. So if it's affecting you from that perspective, it will affect your business as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we want to say, microchip your pets. It could be the difference between getting them back again, and we care a lot about them, but that's deliberate, and it's a much bigger needle. Get your COVID vaccine. There's no microchip. There's no way of tracking, and if you've ever taken a pet in, you'll know how many times they have to run the scanner up and down the skin to pick up the chip. So there's no miracle chip that's going to trace you. Just please, everyone, get your vaccine so we can go back out to bars and restaurants and hang out with our friends, so we can go to conferences. I'm missing out on this.
I know. I'm missing conferences too, right, Amy?
Yes.
Our friend Amy.
Amy Riddell in the comments is that's actually how Leslie and I met, is through Amy. She is one of the greatest connector of people and from all diverse backgrounds, but she's also one of the greatest conference directors we've had the opportunity. She does an amazing series in the US and Canada. We've been doing her virtual events during lockdown, but can't wait to get back. And just the people you get to meet and sit around and talk with at the breaks and the networking at the bar or a restaurant afterwards. And just, it's all fun. It's all lighthearted. One of the guests actually is a true, not a Nigerian prince, but from a different part of Africa, is actually traces back to royalty in one of the tribes he discovered when he was out there speaking. Just the diversity and craziness of the people you can meet is phenomenal. And I think that's really helped build both of our networks and connections to people we can help and work with.
And, even from like, this is a bit of a side note, but this is like a big cheers to Amy too. It's like being a public speaker, and we've met other public speakers as well, but being a public speaker can really be a benefit to your brand as well.
Yep.
Right? Because then you're then seen as the expert in the room. And, we can say we know a little bit more at Hans, but I don't know, you and I maybe we don't. But being a speaker is important, and doing things like this, right? Getting out of your own way. And I think that's it, sort of, I know on a different show, different group, AJ was talking about the imposter syndrome and things like that. So I think that's one of the other areas that we have to own our value. We have to really be able to tell our story and tell people that we are doing these things. Like the fact that you're, doing these kinds of shows, Hans, like shows your expertise. You're getting out of your own way. You're doing it. You don't have to wait for someone else to pick you. You pick you.
Yeah, and I think that's a great transition. So, I'm new to HAPS. I want to thank Michael Bathurst, who's joining us as well today. He and I had been talking about, I need to start broadcasting. I need to start putting these tips, because we'd have these video talks every week. And he's like, people need to hear some of the things you're saying. But for me, it was a challenge. It's like, okay, do I record a video where I'm staring at my camera and this unfinished wall in my basement office? It just wasn't right. But when I finally got things where I was comfortable, knew what I wanted to put out there, it's one of the reasons that I've really enjoyed and taken to HAPS so quickly. The ability to record, to have these great conversations, to be able to pull people in is phenomenal, and to be able to simulcast to the channels where people may be watching, whether it's the Facebook business page, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or YouTube. I can, without any effort on my part, broadcast that message, and it helps me build a library. So anyone who's out there, you've got a perspective, you've got things that are valuable. Maybe you just know some interesting people or want to pull people in. This is a great place to just set up and start broadcasting and see what works. You can delete the videos that, hey, we had fun, but I don't want that out there in the ether. Going on. So what are some other ways that people could take advantage, or you'd suggest starting to look at HAPS or writing blogs or setting up a personal website? What are some other ways that they can extend their brand to better represent themselves as the best of the best in whatever they want to do?
There's so many different avenues. So I have a tendency, like, as I said to you, like as a girl, I gotta put I gotta shower and put my makeup on. So like doing videos is not my favorite thing to do. I'm fairly comfortable with doing them now. But in the past, I was much more comfortable sitting down and writing a blog post, because number one, it helped me with my search engine optimization, and I can do that in my pajamas and not really worry about, the consequences of anybody catching me, on camera, things like that. So whether you're writing blog posts, whether you've raised your hand to speak at a conference, like I wrote, look at me, self-promoting. I wrote a book a few years ago, right? I wrote my own book and I'm self-published. I went on national television before all this COVID stuff happened, because I just said, like, I've got this crazy story. Do you want me to tell it? And they went, sure. And I went, Oh crap. So I think it's a part of us. Like you just have to understand that nobody knows what you know from your perspective, and you bring value. There's always something that you can teach somebody about something. And so stand in your value and own own whatever it is that you want to share. And we're all like you, like AJ was talking about this on Vince's thing about like we're all terrified. Like all speakers um, are terrified of going out there and making a fool out of ourselves. We all, and afterwards, we're all like, I think I sucked. I think I was terrible. Oh my God, everybody judged me. And everyone's like, oh, that's so great. I'm so glad you shared that. I think, we're all in the same boat together. And for me, I think that that's refreshing that people can open the kimono and be all like, we're all in the same boat. Our hearts are all racing when we're presenting. That's why I'm so lucky when I get to co-present with you, because you know that I like, and then Hans goes, what she's trying to say is, and then you like, succinctly tell people exactly where my little squirrel brain is going all over the place. So it's just finding those opportunities and like leaning in, whether it's internal, I presented on this, whether you're presenting in your internal team, whether it's you raising your hand and doing something at your organization that you thought like, oh, I could never do that. Come on. Like you can totally do it. You've got information that nobody else knows, and you're doing a disservice to all those people that need to know what you know when you hold yourself back and you say, yeah, I can't step into that.
Well, and the great thing is that you mentioned is how supportive it can be. When we're out speaking, whether it's in a track session or even eventually making it up to the keynote stage or even doing something like a broadcast like this, there's people who have been in there and they're willing to take time to say, hey, this was great. Maybe this needed a little bit of work, or here's a transition. So one of the things I'm doing with the company that I'm with now is we're trying to get people more camera ready and more, I guess, able to do professional webinars. And so one of the things is, what are the transitions? How do you tie in? How do you run something like an interview? Because a lot of us haven't really thought of that, but there's people who can help us and make it a little less scary. So everyone knows we're terrified, and you're absolutely right. I'm always terrified for the first 2 minutes, and then hopefully I get into a flow or fall off the cliff. Either way, you're gonna laugh one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're with you on that ride. So, and I think, for these kinds of things, even though you and I are speaking to each other, the tips that I will give to my students is like, look into the camera, make sure that you bring a lot of energy. If you're on camera and you're just like, blah, 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 blah. Like nobody wants to listen to that. I mean, one of the things about presenting and even writing and everything, it's about being a good storyteller. So, I think that those things are all key when it sort of comes to, putting yourself out there. And all of this affects your personal brand, your professional brand, however you want to sort of say it. All of these ladder up. And so Rome wasn't built in a day. Like very first time I ever did any presentation was in front of 10 people. And I was like shaking, like I was so freaked out. And now I just have fun with it. Like I'm gonna goof up, I'm gonna screw up, but like imperfect. Like, actually, there's a concept that I absolutely adore, which is called wabi sabi. And this idea of wabi sabi is a Japanese art form, from what I understand, that is finding the beauty in imperfection. And so we all universally beat ourselves up. I talk too much. I'm too like a squirrel in the brain. Like, me, Hans, I'm always sort of self-effacing. But if I wasn't that person who talked too much, who talked too loudly, who, was really bubbly or whatever, if I took that away, I wouldn't be myself anymore. And
Right.
so I learned to accept my imperfections because it's what makes me unique. It's what makes me different. And some people are going to resonate with it. Some people are going to be like, oh, I really like that. And some people are going to be like, she was a little, I had one feedback form on a conference that I spoke at, and they said, she seemed a little manic. And I was like, you think? Better that than coming up and being like, so today I'm here to talk to you about, whatever it is, LinkedIn, whatever. So yeah.
Well, as we're coming to the end, and you mentioned the importance of storytelling, I think
Yeah.
it would be great for the audience to hear what's an amazing story and one that I had to use VPN to be able to watch. But you had the opportunity to attend and be interviewed as an expert on The Social. And that is it's a talk show, it's a daytime talk show in Canada. It's the equivalent to The View in the US. And I apologize to every other country. I don't know your version of The View or The Social, but what was that experience like? How did that come to be? And what happened as a result of that? So that just that one time talking about a few pointers, a few tips that you had that they thought their audience would share. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
So I had worked in publishing before I started my own business in 2009. I had worked in publishing. And so I know that producers and editors and things like that, they're always looking for a good story for their audience.
Yep.
So how it came to be was I found through mutual connections, through LinkedIn, I found this person had been a friend of mine had been on The Social, who's the producer, and then I pitched them a story. And I don't know, I'll tell you my story in just a second, because it's a crazy, crazy story, and it has to do with your digital footprint. But it really was an interesting story for the audience, and I had let them know that I had, done other things on TV and so forth. That experience, just to sort of like summarize, so what they did was they gave me the questions ahead of time. So there was 10 different questions they were going to ask me. We rehearsed it, and then we went live to air. So I'm going to tell you my crazy story here. So what happened to me in 2010, I was working at a charity now. It's now merged with Make-A-Wish. So in Canada, it was Children's Wish, and it's now merged with Make-A-Wish. Not relevant to the story. But I happened to be out of the office. And so I got this message that said, like, Leslie, this doesn't sound like you, but if it is you, I'm really quite surprised. And so I looked through this message, and it's a screen grab, and there's my picture and my email address with the following message. And I'm just going to truncate it, which is, you're a hack, Anne, and we both know it. Stop trying to peddle your webinars and stop trying to be the money grubbing pig that you are. And there's my photo and my name and all this other stuff. And within 8 hours, 40 people had responded to say, Leslie Hughes, you're a disgusting human being. Do you kiss your mother with that mouth? And like, I tell this story on The Social, and everyone went, because I think we all could feel like, what would it be like to have someone pretend to be you, to like basically catfish, pretend to be you, go onto a competitor's website, write these nasty things about a competitor to their face, and then have the consequence of having your personal brand or your professional brand, the fallout of all of that. So having told that story, so the person who did this to me, basically I took the IP address. So my competitor, I don't usually like to use that word, but my competitor gave me the IP address. I went to the police station. They did their due diligence. Thankfully, this is 2010. So this is pretty like a long time ago. They found the guy. He looks exactly the way that you would expect him to. Like, he'd be like somebody from CSI or one of those shows who just said he did it for fun, that he didn't have anything against me, but just did it for fun. On one hand, there's my brand, my professional brand, my business brand out there being compromised and people thinking I'm a disgusting human being. And then from a personal standpoint, I went, if this person is going to show up and do this to my brand, my professional brand, what could they do? Here's me sharing pictures of my son when he was at a preschool. Could they show up at my kid's school and be like, I know your mom, Leslie, and your dog Harley's in the car, and your mommy wants me to come with you, wants you to come with me. What are the consequences and the fallout of me having created a digital footprint for my kid who didn't have the smarts at 3 years old, not to know, oh, your mom's shared all of your personal information, including your photo and where you go to school and all this other stuff. So, I mean, it's a long version. I don't know, is it a long version or short version? But the consequences of that were pretty, like, that's what got me on TV, and I've been able to parlay that into another story. It was a horrible thing to go through, but a good life lesson from a branding perspective, both from a personal brand and from a professional brand.
Yep. Well, and so we're going to close out here. We're trying to keep these shows right around the 45-minute to an hour mark. In the comments, I've posted a link to Leslie's LinkedIn profile so you can see really a great example of how to do it right. This is me stating it. Leslie is going to blush, but if you need help, if you need a review, if you're looking for somebody to help with your brand, with your image, Leslie is my go-to person. She's the one that, even when it comes occasionally to editing and helping me with some things where I'm like, here's what I'm trying to say, but I don't know if this is what I want to put out there. So if you need help, Leslie is awesome. Personal endorsement there. I get no commissions or kickbacks, which I hate, but no, I'm just kidding. Or
I
find
love
somebody
it.
that find somebody that you know that has a profile that you like, and talk to them about that. But really, you have an opportunity to take control and start driving and focusing your personal brand, your professional brand, and all the residual spider webs that connect your different presence through all these different platforms. So I encourage you to, if you haven't already, take that next step and really spend 10 minutes, spend an hour a week figuring out what that's going to be and actually curating the image that you want when people are going to look at you. So I want to turn it over to Leslie for the last word and any advice, parting words for everyone who joined.
I'm so glad you asked, because I have one thing that I'm just like eager to share, which is this quote that I heard. I can't attribute it to anybody because I don't know where it came from. But when you're inside the jar, you cannot see the label. When you're inside the jar, you cannot see the label. We don't see ourselves the way that other people see us. And I hope that that helps, because I think when we, as I said, when we get out of our own way, when we stand on our value and, realize that a lot of people think that we're far more confident and competent than we actually feel like we are on the inside. And so just keep doing a little bit more, like always take these baby steps, like you said, like spend a little time. And it's like, now when people sort of will bust my chops and be like, oh, because I wrote on my LinkedIn headline that CBC called me a social media guru, right? And CBC is our equivalent of like NPR up here, right? And so the radio station, and so when people are like, oh, is this like CBC social media guru? I'm like, you bet your bottom it is. Like, now it's okay, because I was terrified about putting that out in the beginning. But as you and I both know, Hans, you kind of get more comfortable telling your story and saying like, I did this. Like, I'm not bragging about it. Hopefully I don't seem like I'm bragging about it. It's something that I did. And so, you do get more comfortable about it, and no one's going to judge you the way that you judge you. So remember, when you're inside the jar, you can't see the label.
Yep. And always remember where your mute button is. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking time. I know you had a busy day teaching courses as well as doing your regular job. So thanks for taking time out. If you like the show, please follow Leslie. I'm hoping she will start broadcasting from her perspective and pulling on guests as well. Please, like and follow. It's the cheapest and easiest way to sponsor, because we're really here because we want to get certain messages out. And feel free to share this. It'll be posted to the different channels. So if it helped you, if it inspired you, feel free to share, because sharing information is a way of also building your brand, because you're being associated with the information you're sharing. And so take advantage of that. It's probably one of the easiest ways to get started. And as Amy says, go Lancers.
Lancers!
Well, thank you all. Be safe, be well, and take the chance, broadcast when you can, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. I'll be on again this Thursday with the wonderful Allison Straker, who has a great story to tell about how she got into IT and some of the challenges she's faced. So we'll be talking to her at around 5:15 Eastern time this coming Thursday. So thanks again, Leslie.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.